Good morning, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's Sunday, December 23rd. A Merry Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, or Happy Holidays, whatever you may celebrate at this time of year. We're all celebrating the solstice over the past couple of days and a new year ahead of us. So I thought in the wake of the full moon and having done a video about Capricorn and the meaning of the sun in Capricorn, that I was looking and I was like, there's a few things coming up in the next week that are going to be interesting to talk about. Not anything that's at the top of my list today. So a good day for Q&A. I have two really good questions from listeners that came in over the past couple of weeks that I've been meaning to get to and haven't. So I'm going to answer these two questions today. One is regarding the 10th house. There's a very good question from a listener, viewer, reader named Linda about the 10th house. We're going to talk a little bit about the 10th house today. And then another one from another reader about Mars. So Ursula has a question about Mars, and in particular, some questions about how to understand Mars. So we're going to start with the 10th house. So Linda's question is, what insight can the 10th house of career have for someone post-retirement? And this may be for later, but does zodiacal releasing figure into this? So two questions. I'm going to stick with the first because the second is a little advanced about zodiacal releasing, and I think the first will answer it anyway. The first answer that I have should get to that first question and answer both at once. All right. So first of all, I've gotten this question a lot from people actually over the years, because during sessions, a lot of the times people come in or they'll email me in advance and say, I want to do a reading, but I'm not sure what astrology might have to say about my life post-retirement. Like I'm not necessarily going out into the world with a big agenda. Now, that's not true for everyone who's retired. Obviously, everyone treats retirement very differently, but I do get questions, people thinking, if I'm not like doing anything more with my career, will astrology still have some insight into what, my purpose is going to be, or what I'm going to do, or what my interests might be? Is there a way of looking at that? And obviously the answer is yes. So first of all, it's important to remember that the 10th house is not the house of career. More so, the 10th house has become the house of career over time because of the way that our values change and shift over time. We've sort of adapted the 10th house to mean career. But the ancient meaning of the 10th house is a little bit more general. It becomes the career over time in the tradition for good reason. It's not unfounded. And it is a great house. It is probably, of all of the houses, along with maybe the second, sometimes the sixth, these are houses that we look at for career. But there's so many different factors that play into one's career. So the 10th house was traditionally called Praxis. That was the name that it was given by the ancient Greek astrologers. It was also called Karma by Indian astrologers. What does that mean? Well, the name Praxis or Karma both mean basically the same thing, which is action. Action and reaction in the world are the study of the 10th house. There are other houses that are said to be houses of action as well. That the 10th house is a house of action insofar as it is a house that captures the actions that we take in the public, visible sphere. You could think of it as a house that pertains to your actions, your reputation, the role that you play, your fame or infamy within the broader culture or civilization into which you are born. That's the greater society into which you are born. This is the place, remember, whether you're looking at the 10th whole sign house and you're talking about the 90-degree marker of the ecliptic above the horizon, or you're talking about the midheaven or the meridian point, which is also a kind of the high noon marker for the sun. Either of these places in the chart, the degree of the midheaven or the 10th whole sign house, represent high points in the sky. So when a planet reaches that high point, we're talking about having ascended and reaching a culmination point. It's very visible. It's where everybody can see it. It's on high. So where everybody can see you in the world usually is the workplace. It's usually your occupation. It's usually what you do that contributes to the society, or what your role is in the society. I'm a builder. I'm a merchant, I'm a teacher, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, or I'm I'm an Uber driver, whatever the case might be. Um, the actions that we take in the world, and how visible they are, how notable they are, or how eminent we are in the world, those are all considerations for the 10th house. So first of all, of course, our worldly reputation and actions in the world also have reactions. Some of what the 10th house depicts has to do with the actions that we will take in the world, and it has to do with how select we will be from among the city. Remember, the opposite house, the 4th house, is related in astrology to the city, the dwelling place or the abiding place, the family. The 10th has to do with how you are select, or how you stand out as an individual from that kind of eternal base of the chart that we all come from and return to: the home, the private sphere, the city, the public life, or the community life, things like that. The 10th is, in a sense, has more to do with standing out and being noticed, or standing out and being select and unique, and cultivating some sense of reputation, rank, authority, mastery. Remember, it's a house that's related to judges who have the ability to determine and issue judgment between life and death. Why? Because it sits at the top of the sky, the pivotal place between rising and falling. The judge has the decision: will this person, rise up, or will they fall down? Will their name be cleared, or will they go to prison? Will they be judged guilty or innocent? That 10th house is also a place of decision and judgment. And it's also a place of being select or standing out. Kings, rulers, CEOs, authority figures at the top. Fame, but also infamy, being known for good or bad things. So now that you kind of have a sense of all of that, remember that some people come into this life and they choose the actions that they will take very consciously in the world. And that determines our public standing. And it's about your occupation. And some people, sometimes whimsically and sometimes more authentically, would call it a place of calling. Some people say they have a calling to go out and be, and do things that by all standards we would say are just greedy. That's not calling in the spiritual sense, is it? But other times people would, feel called to do something in service to the world, or their spiritual life would come into accord with their sense of purpose and action in the world. So there's more or less also spiritualized visions of the 10th house. The point is that career falls into this category for a lot of people, right? But think about people whose life and sense of purpose and action and reputation, rank, or authority in the world are not just defined by their career. Well, I think probably a lot of us fall under that category, right? Not all of us feel as though our sense of purpose, what we're known for, has simply to do with our career or the title of our job or something like that. So you have to remember that the 10th house is a lot broader than just speaking of the career. That also means that beyond retirement, the 10th house is obviously in effect, because do your actions in the world stop after you retire? For most people, no. So what you're really looking at for the 10th house is the ruler or planets in the 10th will tell you about what kinds of actions in the world matter to you, what kinds of actions you will be conscious of in the world and will go after. On the other hand, there's also a sense of the 10th house and the planets that we don't always have a choice over this, right? How is it that I came to be interested in astrology? Did I have a buffet of options and sit down and really think about it and then really consciously choose to go after astrology? Absolutely not. And for most people, that's the way that career or anything works. There's some level of conscious intentionality to our lives and choice. But we have to remember that we're also karmic beings who have lived multiple lives. Or you could think of just destiny playing a role if you don't believe in past lives. In this sense, almost all ancient astrologers believed in fate and in destiny and in allotment, in fortune, in things that, like a garden, there's going to be plants that just come up at certain times in life, and that's just because that they're there, dormant in the soil of the birth. So our lives are more ecological than we imagine most of the time. We think of our lives as contained just within my skin, just within inside of me and my head and what I choose consciously. But a lot of our life is environmental. A lot of our life is what springs up around us that we think we often think of as very separate from ourselves, but actually a deep part of us. And in the world around us, we're connected to many elements of our lives, and many elements of who we are will spring up not just within the physical proximity of my body, but within the environment and due to karma. And so a lot of what the 10th house shows us is also, the kinds of things that will spring up around our actions and reactions in the world that are more public or visible for everyone to see, that we'll be known by, for better or worse, and mixed, not just one or the other too. But the symbols of astrology give us also some very specific and sometimes very general pictures of what kinds of things we'll be compelled to do. So when you're in retirement, Linda, and you're asking what insight does the 10th house have, it's going to tell you, along with its ruler and planets in the 10th house, aspects being made to planets more precisely in the 10th house. It's going to tell you about what compels you and what kinds of actions and intentions in the world and the visible society in which you are born are likely to spring up at what times and occupy your consciousness and occupy your attention and like that. So career is one part of that, but our lives in the visible world, in the sphere of the society we live in, are much broader also than just our career. So that's a good way of looking at it, I think. So thanks, Linda, for that question. I hope that is a satisfying answer. Ursula's question comes next. Ursula has a question about Mars. She's saying, I don't get Mars at all. First of all, she says that traditional descriptions of Mars are just horrendous. Sometimes they are, but not always. Mars is obviously, look, one of the things that helps to remember is that the language of astrology can't be taken, you can't single out any one planet. In order to really understand the entire language and the almost like the cosmology that ancient astrologers had developed, you have to understand the language of opposites. Everything in this world moves in terms of relationships of opposites, right? The qualities in nature, dry and wet, hot and cold. The four elements in ancient sort of elemental theory, Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, the fluctuations of this material world that we live in, where change is constant. Change is really the only thing that in a sense is constant. And the changes are comprised of fluctuations of the opposites moving in cycles. That's what the Tao, the I Ching studies, the Tao Te Ching talks about. This is what ancient astrologers were also talking about. And this is very basic to the paradigm of astrology. So Mars can't be understood separate from Venus, right? So love and war, peace and strife, action or assertiveness, and more passive receptive qualities, they come along with one another. So it's actually very simple to understand Mars. You have to understand that, for example, if I'm just going to do this exercise, right? I'm just going to bring up a news feed here. Tsunami kills at least 222 in Indonesia. That is the front wave. That is the front headline that we see here. We also see, 9 people arrested in Morocco tourist beheadings, right? These are horrible headlines to read. This is stuff that really disturbs the mind and heart to read. Of course, there are people with great compassion and empathy who dedicate their lives to, working and helping people who suffer in positions like this, just rushing in. Both of those are Mars. The beheading is Mars, as well as the impulse to rush in and advocate, protect, defend, fight against evil or difficulties or hardships or misfortunes. Both are Mars. The impulse to action for Mars is often involved in strife, because the general picture of Mars, first of all, Mars is not, some people will say Mars is the planet of action, and it is, but like, don't mistake action for movement or change, because movement and change are, no planet has the market cornered on like physics. You know what I mean? Like all planets are pictures of different kinds of change and movement and activity in the world. So Mars is not like anything that you do that's an action is Mars. That's just absurd. But Mars is more like, decisive, willed, intentional actions that kind of strike, that move with a kind of speed, muscle, intensity, force, vigor, swiftness. That's all Mars. So, when in Mars is violence, and Mars is war. Mars is a god of war. So these qualities really define Mars. But valor, courage, and fighting a good fight, to protect, to defend, to advocate, with that kind of jumping into action. Martyrs were traditionally associated with Mars, people who would die for a cause. So you have to understand Mars as encapsulating itself a range of expressions, right? And it's not just horrendous and violent and horrible, but the ancient language depicts Mars in such horrible language because, first of all, it's an everyday reality. In the United States and in the West in general, we live a lot of the times with a lot of distance from the more primitive, violent level of human experience. But for many people around the world, it is a much, much more common and basic everyday reality, as it was for people during the, in the ancient world. Lifespan was shorter, death was sometimes crueler and more violent. And, in some ways we think, well, we've become so refined, we've become so advanced. But obviously advancement comes with things like triggers. We can pull a trigger, we can press a button and drop a bomb, we can fly a drone. So in some ways, wealth and refinement and different kinds of advancements that we've made, say in medicine or in, equal opportunities for people that have gotten better over time. There are also downsides that have come along with it. In some ways, we never get too far from our base desires and our most base problems and evils. So we've distanced ourselves in some ways from the reality of these brutal realities. That doesn't make the ancient descriptions of Mars more horrendous and horrible back then than they should be today. Because all you have to do, again, is turn on the news on any given day to see greed and violence and death and killing and obsession with guns and, all sorts of sexual misconduct and things like that. And immediately we are reminded of the fact that Mars is still very much horrible and horrendous. There's not a lot of change in that regard. And that's because this world, this material world, is a cycle. It keeps going. In some ways, what we think of as new is old, and what we think of as old is new. And the cycles of time are repetitive. And we make what appears to be great advancements during some times, and they're actually deeply regressive, and vice versa. So that's the duality of time itself, and understanding the way that time exists as a kind of perceptual experience. So at any rate, that's just first of all to say that really not a lot has changed about Mars. Mars still encompasses these opposites of both valor and courage and decisive action that's pioneering or adventurous, like extreme sports, or the desire to surf a wave or climb a mountain. The muscle and strength and vigor of the warrior is a positive and a negative. And pretty much any astrologer, the traditional or modern, will tell you that. But I like to stick up for the traditional descriptions because they're really not, in some ways, they're more honest, I feel, than sometimes you'll get from astrologers who want to whitewash Mars and just be like, well, Mars is just action. Well, no, not really. It's not actually described that way traditionally at all. It's described as the god of war and action. It's certain kinds of actions that belong to Mars, the willful, powerful, yang kind of action. Desire as well belongs to Mars, the hunt, the kill, the chase. Okay, so at any rate, the next part of this question is, I don't know how to direct it because I don't understand it. Some say without Mars, we would get nothing done. Why do we have to get anything done? Okay, these are good questions. So first of all, this idea of we have to direct planets, like I've got to direct my Mercury and I've got to direct my Mars. And for the most part, I would say I would avoid this kind of thinking because it's really dissociative. It really takes us, most of the time, it takes us out of our body and puts us in our head. Like, okay, I've got to direct this planet. You know, you're not directing a planet. You know what I mean? And then secondly, well, it's my planet. It's my planet. I have to direct it. No, it's not your planet. It's a freaking omen. It's like a tarot card. You know what I mean? Nobody gets that identified with a tarot card. The reason that we tend to get identified with the planet is because we think of it in these pseudoscientific terms. Well, it's an energy and it lives in me and it's all like that. Don't think about it that way. It doesn't matter what it is or isn't. Just think very, very practically, meaning, how am I an assertive person? Do I have trouble being assertive? If I have trouble being assertive, then, how can I become more assertive in a healthy way? Those are very basic questions that we ask as humans who have to deal with will and assertiveness. And you don't have to bring in like this idea of directing some kind of, space mobile Mars energy. It doesn't help usually to conceptualize it like that, regardless of what kind of energies Mars may or may not have or whatever. Just, I guess the simplest thing I could say is just that you're not directing, driving, or in ownership of Mars, right? So don't think of it that way. Mars as a planet, Ares in the Greek tradition, signifies different kinds of actions and activities in your life, most of which in astrology, when they're being described in a chart or in a transit or whatever, are talking about forces that the symbols stand for that are complex and variegated and multiplicitous. It's not like there's just one Mars force either. And it's remember that like a tarot card can represent many different things happening in your life and sort of put them all together in a coherent way. That's what symbols do. They sort of aggregate different levels of the unfolding of our lives that are happening and sort of speak to them by using a symbolic kind of core. So it's easier to just be like, okay, look, I don't have to direct anything. I don't have to harness anything. I don't have to control the energy of anything. Like most of the time when we think that way, it's already evidence that we're being controlled by something. And that's usually more about what the planets are. Remember in India, I've said this a billion times, but they're called grahas or grabbers. In the West, similarly, these are the stars of the gods. And the gods direct human affairs. The gods have a tendency to possess those who are sort of stupid, ignorant, or foolish, those who are what we would call unconscious, those people who are not in some ways who don't have a healthy core sense of self. And the real way, of course, of developing a healthy sense of self is through spiritual life. That's what we do. When we meditate, for example, we come into contact with various forces, what we might call energies, gods, presences, voices, complexes in the psyche, whatever you want to call them. We come into contact with them and we start recognizing, oh, that's that. But I'm still the observer. I'm still the witness. There's still a separate conscious entity that is myself. and I exist in relation to these forces, but I have to do some healthy differentiating in order to have a sense of self. So similarly, with the planets, when people say, how do I direct it? How do I control it? How do I, whatever? A lot of the times what we're saying is one of two things. One, we're already suggesting that we're getting dominated by, or we're in the possession of something that's very strong and other, and we're feeling overwhelmed by it. And that's natural. Like that's how most of us feel, because that's a daily occurrence. Like it's very easy to, well, for example, my spiritual teacher recently told a story that I thought was great. He said, you go to buy a car, right? And the salesman, you're in the lot or whatever, and salesman says, what's your favorite color? This is a story that he actually told. And you say, red. And he says, I've got just the car for you. Come and check this out. And then he says, go ahead, sit down in it. And you sit down in it, and he says, that's you. And you're like, yeah, that's me. Before you know it, the car has become like an appendage of you. You know what I mean? The identification with the car kind of becomes a part of you. But the problem with this in material life, whether it's a car or anything, is that that's really not who we are. And eventually anything that we are not will be taken away from us, will fall off from us. That's just the way that it works. So we die eventually. We can't take anything with us. Everything falls off. Now, it's not to say that we should remain in some kind of pure white vacuum or something, but it's just to be aware of the fact that, like, I like this car, but like the car is not me, right? And even to say it's my car, we have to be careful, because then we can start generating all sorts of kind of complexes around how cool I am because of my car, right? Just that kind of stuff. That's our tendency. So similarly with the planets, like when we ask, how do I direct or intend or use this planet or my Mars or whatever, we just have to be careful, because it's like, okay, just remember that you are not your Mars, you are not your birth chart. They're describing something. They're a message to you. Are you reading the message? Are you hearing the message? And then are you taking that as a whole and complete entity unto yourself, and going out into the world and trying to live a life prepared to meet your destiny? So everybody has will. Everybody has, some muscles on their body. Everyone has action. Everyone has ability to be assertive. So there's no like, how do you direct your Mars? You don't. You just be a human. Just go out and do the best you can. What does a good Mars look like? It's courageous. It's helpful. It knows how to take a stand for things that are important without harming others. It knows how to be it's like, get your warrior on, girl, like do your best warrior in the world. That's it. It's just that simple. Just, try to be assertive in the right ways. Try not to be timid or afraid or fearful in the ways that hold you back or that keep you from love. Try to be aggressive and competitive in ways that are fun and uplifting. Basic stuff. We know it in our hearts. Like everyone knows what a good Mars looks like in their heart. Someone's picking on a little kid when you're in elementary school. You say, hey, knock it off. Don't be a bully. The Mars is the protector. If you see someone that you really like, and you can feel there's an attraction between the two of you, someone has to get the courage up to say, hey, I like you. Would you like to go out with me, or whatever the case might be? So you have to get the courage up to ask, right? That it's just that, like, just using assertiveness in a good way that's aligned with your heart. That's all that a good Mars looks like. And anybody can do that. Anybody can work on cultivating that. Are we all perfect at it? No, not at all. Some Mars placements in the chart will talk about certain kinds of difficulties that we encounter with Mars related themes. Violence in the home, violence in the family, power struggles in relationships, dominance at work, hyper desirous, greedy impulse to dominate, with building wealth in the world, or, inability to say no to our physical desires or hungers. These are all things that we deal with that in a sense could be signified by Mars. And we just have to get out there and do our best to be strong and capable individual, capable of meeting the challenges of the world, not getting sucked into things because we're sort of strong in our heart and can combat the forces that try to come in and take us over. But we also are receptive, and we know what it's like. One of the strongest things that a warrior can do is know when to lay down their sword, right? Know when to be self-sacrificing and yielding. And that's a yin yang kind of dynamic. Remember, Mars's home signs are opposite Venus's home signs. So it's a give and take as well. Do you have to get anything done? Well, remember that it's like some say without Mars we would get nothing done. Well, that's silly. From a divinatory standpoint, that's like saying, without the Ace of Wands, we would get nothing done. But it's not the Ace of Wands that's doing things. Do you know what I mean? It's not the symbol. It's not the symbolic value. It's not the message. Try to think of the planets in the birth chart as speaking something to you, as a message from something that's too vast for your mind to circumscribe. So things like, without Mars, I wouldn't get things done. This is like, we're veering into like pseudoscience territory where we're trying to be too specific with the way everything works and the way everything's wired. And it's not, most of us live lives that leads to confusion, and confusion then leads to kind of like frustration, and it devolves from there. So just, some say without Mars, we would get nothing done. Well, some say, that some also say that that everything in the cosmos is necessary for everything else. So what does that mean? So why do we have to get anything done? Well, apparently we were born here, and as soon as we're born, we're pushed along in life, and we do things, or things move and live through us. And in some ways, we're very passive observers of this lifetime. In some ways, we're witnesses to our own lives. We're method acting a great play on the stage. Why do we have to get anything done is a very good question. And there's not just one answer to that. I think you can, the best answer I have here is just, live life and, see how it goes. And then with Mars, when it comes to Mars, just remember that we're all compelled to action, and having a right relationship with Mars, with action, usually boils down to just trying to figure out how to, when you have Mars transits, or you're living through an intense Mars transit of some kind, it usually boils down to figuring out how to use your action, your strength, your muscle, your force, your assertive qualities, which we all have. Is just learning how to be in right relationship with those things, being in right alignment with those things. Okay, so that's kind of a sprawling philosophical response to some very difficult but good questions about Mars from Ursula. So I appreciate those questions, Ursula. I hope this answer helps a little bit. I'm not sure, but that's what I've got for you guys. So I hope you have a beautiful Sunday, and we will be with you again over the next couple of days. Remember, there's just 8 days left in my annual Kickstarter. I'm about 83 backers away from my finish line total of 360 backers. I need your support. I just have 8 days left. $5, $10, $15. You can go all the way up to picking a reading for the year ahead at a little bit higher levels, like 75 or 100. It really helps. This is how I earn my living every year. So I really appreciate your support if you enjoy this channel and my work. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye.